So here we are with another video in this series or playlist that I'm doing on this guitar. It is a Glarry GCL semi-hollow, and full disclosure, I did get it for free from Glarry in exchange for a review. If you're interested in that review, you can click up here on the eye in the upper part of the screen. So the whole purpose, like I said, was to make some modifications and upgrades to the guitar to make it on par with, say, a Squier or a Fender Mexican guitar, or maybe something even better. In the last video, we talked about the Bigsby installation, which is obviously one of the biggest visual and functional differences in the guitar. But I didn't just talk about the alignment and drilling holes. I also talked about the distance from the back of the guitar, the distance from the bridge, talked about the break angle off the back of the saddles. We even talked about shimming the neck, all which play a major part in the way the Bigsby operates. What we're talking about today is very closely related to the Bigsby, and that is the bridge setup. Now, if you don't already know, you can't just use a regular old Telecaster ashtray bridge with this type of Bigsby. You've either got to modify it or buy something new. In my case, I'm going to show you what I did to modify the bridge to accommodate the strings with a fair amount of effort, but of course saving money by not buying something new. We're also going to be talking about the different type of saddle options that you have for this setup, and in my opinion, what works best. So without further ado, let's get into it. The first step was to remove the ashtray bridge from the guitar and subsequently the bridge pickup from the ashtray. I will note here that the pickups you're seeing are not the original pickups that came in the guitar. I'll spill the beans that they're Tex-Mex pickups because despite changing out the wiring, pots, switch, jack, and of course pickups, unfortunately I didn't capture any footage of me actually doing this. However, I might make a video later describing exactly what I did. The next step, of course, was to remove the saddles from the ashtray. It's a good idea at this point to take measurements of where the saddles are to give you a rough idea of where to start when reinstalling them so that your intonation is at least in the ballpark. If you have a keen eye, you might have noticed that all three saddles here are different. There wasn't much rhyme or reason to it, I was basically just experimenting. The one on the high strings is a brass Goto compensated saddle. Brass is generally a bit darker sounding, so it makes sense for the higher strings. The one on the lower strings is steel, which is typically a bit snappier, hence a good pair for the lower strings. The one in the middle is a saddle that actually came with the guitar, and from what I can tell, it's just some type of chrome coated steel. Now, I wanted to mark the end of the ashtray where I intended to make the grooves. At first I tried using a straight edge to line it up, but this isn't rocket science, so I ended up just eyeballing it. Then I decided to use a small file, in this case a triangular file, to make the first sort of cuts into the metal and serve as a guide for the bigger file. This set of files came from Harbor Freight. It was inexpensive and has actually come in quite handy over various projects. Anyway, the triangle file worked really well to get the grooves started. You just have to use a little elbow grease and to make sure you don't stab yourself in the process. Once I had my starting grooves, I figured I wasn't going to be able to hold the ashtray sturdy enough with my bare hands and decided to mount it to a piece of 2x4 to give me a better grip. I just used the original mounting holes and screws to hold it down. When all that was said and done, I went at the grooves a bit more with the triangular file just to make sure I had decent guides. Now, even with my starting grooves, using a larger flat file wasn't exactly easy going, as you might be able to tell from the camera shaking in my footage. But once I got going and wasn't timid with my strokes, I made a lot of progress. However, speaking of being timid, I wasn't quite careful enough, and although I didn't get it on camera, I actually gouged the ashtray pretty bad. And unfortunately, it was the nice Fender one and not the cheaper Glarry one. Now, if you've noticed, on the genuine Fender Tele bridges, the area above the pickup is polished smooth and the area below is rough. I don't know exactly why this is, and I'd be interested to hear if you do, so feel free to leave a comment below. I don't have a great before shot of the gouge I made, but you can imagine the size of the scratch due to that big and very coarse file. This is video of after the fact where I tried all manner of sanding, scratching, smoothing, and polishing to try to blend it in, but there was just no going back. My initial thought was to just use the original Glarry bridge instead since I had it on hand. It wasn't of course my first choice, but I figured since I was already deep into it, I would scallop the Glarry bridge too, and then if I wanted, I could just buy a new Fender ashtray down the road and go to the trouble again of making new grooves into that one. So that being said, I wised up with the Glarry ashtray and put painter's tape all over the surface to provide a buffer against any future stray file strokes. Since I had already gotten the hang of things, it was basically smooth sailing with making the new grooves. I do want to point out a couple things here. During the process, I tended to flip the file over periodically to ensure that I didn't get a lopsided triangle groove. It may not have mattered, but I have a feeling that it helped out and I was happy with the results in the end. I also want to say that I was a little afraid that digging into the metal, especially of the Glarry bridge, would reveal an ugly sort of brown or black unpolished carbon steel. I'm thinking like a rusty piece of rebar you'd see at a demo construction site. I guess in my head I was thinking that they somehow dipped a sort of crappy piece of metal into a vat of chrome to make it appear shiny. However, I was pleasantly surprised that both bridges retained that shiny chrome finish all the way through the deep grooves. So when it was all over, I ended up scalloping 2 ashtray bridges. Now that is a lot of elbow grease. So now on to the saddles. I did a bit of research to see what the best options were for a Tele with the Bigsby, and unless you have a rocking Jazzmaster style bridge or a Bigsby B16, the best choice by far seems to be the Vibramate saddles. And the entire reason for this is the fact that you can adjust the saddles back and forth from the neck side of the bridge. Trying to adjust the saddle the normal way, i.e. from the butt end of the guitar, would be nearly impossible with the Bigsby in the way. Now, even though they have guides for your strings, they don't have any type of compensation to help out with intonation. That's really my only gripe with them, but to be honest, I really haven't had any issue with it. You might have noticed that I ended up using the scratched up Fender ashtray bridge after all. The main reason is because I had so many weird fit up issues with the Glarry bridge. No matter what I tried, I just couldn't get it to fit with a standard size Fender bridge pickup, which again in this case was a Tex-Mex. The holes in the ashtray wouldn't really align with the pickup and they were too small for the Fender screws, and when I did finally make the pickup fit, the ashtray holes for mounting wouldn't align with those in the guitar body. All that combined with the fact that after much fidgeting, I finally got the Fender ashtray bridge to look decent, made the Fender one win out in the end. And lastly, it dawned on me that the original Glarry ashtray screws seemed smaller and I guess more chintzy than the Fender versions, so I did some research to find the right ones. It turns out that they are number 6 1-inch oval Phillips head screws that you can get at your local hardware store, and as you can see, they are much more substantial than the Glarry ones. To install the screws, I enlarged the holes in the body using a drill bit slightly smaller than the new screws, being sure to use some tape as a depth stop. Then I used a countersink to widen just the top of the holes. This step might not be absolutely necessary, but the new oval head style screws had much more of a gradual cone shape than the older panhead style screws, and I thought it would help them seat in the position better. After that, all I needed was a little wiggity wiggity wax on the screws to help guide them in.
It's wiggity 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 whack.
Alright, that's it for this video. Thanks as always for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Actually, I won't see you in the next one. That's the unfortunate thing. I never get to see you. I mean, you'll get to see me. So see me in the next one. Bye.